Jamie arrived in Manchester on a Thursday afternoon, the kind that felt heavy without any clear reason. The city moved faster than he expected. Cars rolling past, people weaving through pavements with purpose, voices spilling out of cafes and bus stops like part of the air itself. He stood on the curb with two suitcases that suddenly felt too big, too heavy, too obvious. A new city, a new flat, a stranger for a roommate, and no plan beyond figure it out. The building was older than the pictures suggested. Brick weathered by decades of wind, balconies cluttered with mismatched plants. The hallway smelled faintly of spices and cheap air freshener. Jamie checked the door number twice before knocking. It swung open almost immediately. The man standing there looked like he'd stepped straight out of a fitness advert. Shirtless, skin still glistening faintly as though he'd only just stepped out of the shower. His hair was damp, pushed back with careless fingers, and a tattoo curved from his collarbone toward his shoulder. Muscular, confident, maybe too confident, with a grin that arrived before the words did. "You're Jamie, yeah?" he asked, voice low and warm, carrying an easy Mancunian rhythm. "Sorry, just finished a shower. Didn't think you'd be this early." He held out a damp hand. Jamie shook it anyway, trying not to look distracted by the drops of water rolling down his chest. This was Mason. They'd never spoken beyond a few exchanged messages. Jamie had only heard about him through a chain of mutual friends that barely held together, each more vague than the last. "He's nice, just loud," someone had warned. "He's a bit wild but harmless," another had said. Jamie, desperate for a place he could afford, had taken the risk. Now, seeing the man in front of him, he wondered whether wild had been an understatement. Mason stepped aside, ushering him in with a casual flick of his wrist. "Come on in. Mind the shoes. I'm terrible at cleaning up after myself." The flat wasn't as messy as Jamie feared, but it had the unmistakable stamp of someone who lived loudly. A gym bag spilled open near the sofa. A hoodie lay half across the armrest. An empty protein shake bottle decorated the kitchen counter beside a frying pan left out to dry. Yet the place felt lived in, warm, not unwelcoming. "Your room's down the hall, last on the left," Mason said, grabbing one of Jamie's suitcases like it weighed nothing. "Hope you don't mind the noise. The street's always awake." Jamie followed him, trying to take everything in without staring too much at the broad shoulders leading the way. "Noise doesn't bother me," he replied quietly, though he wasn't entirely sure. Mason dropped the suitcase at the door of Jamie's room and leaned on the frame, arms crossed, the posture casual, the presence anything but. "If you need anything, just shout. I'm around most evenings unless I'm at the studio." "Boxing, right?" Jamie asked. Mason grinned. Guilty. There was an ease about him, a kind of unfiltered confidence Jamie had never learned to have. It made everything Mason did, even leaning in the doorway, look deliberate without him trying. Jamie felt painfully aware of his own awkwardness in comparison. Later, when he unpacked and settled in, he found the hum of the city through his window steady and strangely comforting. A new place, a new start. He told himself it would be fine. By evening, Mason was in the kitchen, rummaging through cupboards. He was still shirtless, still moving around like he owned the oxygen in the room. Jamie hovered near the doorway, unsure if he should offer help or quietly retreat. Mason spotted him instantly. "You hungry? I've only got frozen pizzas and whatever this leftover thing is. Could be pasta, could be an ancient curse. Hard to tell." He said it so casually that Jamie couldn't help a small laugh. "Pizza's fine." "Legend." Mason shoved two in the oven without reading the instructions. "Heat solves everything." Jamie doubted that was true but didn't say so. They ended up eating on the sofa, legs stretched out, the TV playing something loud and forgettable. Mason sprawled like a king on his throne, long legs taking most of the space. Jamie tucked himself into the corner cushion, careful not to brush against him. "So," Mason said through a mouthful of pizza, "what brings you to Manchester? Job? Escape? Bad decisions?" Jamie blinked at the bluntness. "Bit of all three," he admitted. Mason laughed with his whole chest, the sound filling the room. "Brilliant answer." Jamie found himself smiling, despite the knot of nerves that had clung to him all day. As the days rolled on, they slipped into a strange kind of routine. Mason woke early, blasting music from the bathroom as he showered with the door slightly ajar. He wasn't trying to be provocative. He just wasn't used to living with someone who noticed things. Jamie noticed everything. The scent of Mason's deodorant lingering in the hall. The faint scrape of his razor in the mornings. The way he hummed tunelessly as he cooked eggs. Always enough for two, even before Jamie started joining him. Mason would come home sweaty from training sessions, toss his shirt into the hamper, and walk around half-dressed without a second thought. Jamie pretended it was fine, normal, easy. But each careless display of skin churned something warm and confusing inside him. They talked more than Jamie expected. Mason told endless gym stories. Funny, chaotic, sometimes profound in ways he didn't intend. Jamie, in return, found himself talking about things he normally kept hidden. Moving away from home, starting fresh, not knowing where he fit in the world. You ever feel like everyone else is moving faster than you? Mason asked one night, lying half off the sofa with his feet on the coffee table. All the time, Jamie said softly. Mason hummed in agreement. Same. People think I've got it together because I'm loud. Truth is, sometimes I'm just trying not to think too hard. Jamie had never heard confidence sound uncertain before. It made Mason seem more human, more real, than his muscles or jokes ever had. One morning, Jamie walked into the bathroom to grab something and froze. Steam billowed from the shower. Mason stepped out wearing only a towel, water tracing the lines of his chest. "Oh, hey, mate," he said casually, shaking his hair like a dog. "Didn't see you." Jamie muttered something, face burning, and quickly stepped out. He knew exactly why he felt flustered. He just wasn't ready to admit it. Mason wasn't flirting, not on purpose, at least. He was simply comfortable in his skin in a way Jamie had never been. And that comfort, more than the muscles or the grin, kept tugging at Jamie in quiet, persistent ways. In the evenings, they watched shows together, often without truly watching. Mason would lean over to show Jamie something on his phone. A meme, a gym fail video, and his shoulder would brush Jamie's in a way that lingered a second too long. Jamie tried not to think about it, but he did. He thought about it at night when the flat fell quiet. He thought about it when Mason laughed, head tilted back, carefree and bright. He thought about it when Mason walked past shirtless, stretching after a workout, completely unaware of what it did to Jamie. For Mason, it was just life. For Jamie, it was something else. A warmth he didn't want but couldn't ignore. One night, while they sat watching a nature documentary, Mason slowly stretched his arms above his head, exposing a thin line of tan skin. Jamie's gaze drifted for half a second too long. "You good?" Mason asked, catching him. "Yeah," Jamie said quickly. "Just tired." Mason grinned. "Or hypnotized?" Jamie scoffed. "Don't flatter yourself." Mason laughed, patting the cushion beside him. "Come here. These birds are insane. You've got to see this." Jamie sat closer than usual. Not too close, but close enough. Their shoulders brushed once, then twice. Jamie didn't move away. He wasn't sure if the moment meant nothing or everything. And for the first time since arriving in Manchester, the thought didn't scare him. It made him feel, dangerously quietly, alive. The tension between Jamie and Mason didn't come all at once. It slipped in quietly, the way warmth spreads through a room without anyone noticing at first. Their days continued almost the same. Shared meals, shared jokes, shared space. But something beneath the ordinary began to thrum with an energy neither of them acknowledged. It wasn't dramatic, just a slow, steady shift. A closeness that didn't feel accidental anymore. It started with the bathroom. Jamie woke early one morning and padded down the hallway, half asleep, needing toothpaste. He pushed open the bathroom door and froze. Steam lingered in the air, fogging the mirror. Mason had just stepped out of the shower, a towel slung loosely around his hips, damp hair dripping onto his shoulders. His skin glistened under the warm light, water tracing down the lines of his chest. "Oh, morning," Mason said casually, running a hand through his hair. Didn't know you were up. Jamie stared at the floor. Just needed something. Grab it, Mason said, stepping aside as though the room weren't swirling with awkwardness. Jamie did grab it, quickly, and slipped out, closing the door behind him. His heart thudded for reasons he did not want to analyze. He leaned against the wall, breathing in the faint scent of Mason's shampoo drifting under the door. It wasn't the first time Mason had been half-dressed around him, but it was the first time Jamie had realized how much it affected him. Mason wasn't flirting. He was just Mason, comfortable, unguarded, oblivious to the storm he stirred without meaning to. Later that day, Mason walked out of his room while pulling a hoodie over his head, still shirtless underneath, abs momentarily exposed before the fabric landed in place. Up for breakfast? He asked like nothing was unusual. Got eggs, mushrooms, beans, the full effort today. Jamie sat at the table while Mason cooked, trying hard not to stare at the defined muscles shifting under the hoodie whenever he reached for something. Mason talked about a difficult client at the boxing studio, demonstrating punches in the air as he flipped eggs in the pan. Jamie wondered how someone could be so physical all the time without thinking twice. They ate the breakfast together in silence, comfortable but charged. Jamie kept his eyes on his plate. Mason kept glancing at him for reasons Jamie didn't understand. A few days later, Mason brought up the gym. Got a guest pass, he said one evening while lying across the sofa, legs thrown over the armrest. Come on, let me train you for a day. It'll be a laugh. Jamie almost refused, but Mason's grin had a strange pull. So he agreed. The gym was Mason's kingdom. As soon as they stepped inside, Mason transformed from goofy flatmate to someone who owned the space. Trainers called out greetings. Clients fist-bumped him. He offered tips to strangers as though he were the unofficial mayor of the weights section. Jamie felt out of place, clinging to the treadmill while Mason jogged effortlessly beside him. Relax, Mason said, noticing his tense shoulders. No one's judging you. You are, Jamie said breathlessly. Mason's laugh echoed off the gym walls. Mate, I'm impressed you even got on the treadmill. After the run, Mason handed him a water bottle and nudged his shoulder. You've got potential. Might turn you into a beast. Jamie rolled his eyes, but the touch lingered in his mind long after they left. On the walk home, Mason's energy seemed softer, quieter, as if he were thinking about something he couldn't quite say. Jamie kept stealing glances, wondering if he imagined it. Back at the flat, they returned to their usual habits. Mason kicked off his shoes and collapsed onto the couch. Mate, I'm destroyed, he groaned, dragging a hand over his face. Leg day should be illegal. Jamie sat beside him, leaving enough space to pretend he wasn't tempted to close the gap. You're the one who made us run. Correction, you ran like a confused duck. I sprinted. Jamie smacked a cushion into his chest. Mason laughed, grabbing it and holding it hostage behind his head. Their nights became a mix of banter and quiet moments that stretched longer than they should. Sometimes Mason sprawled across the whole sofa, forcing Jamie to claim whatever corner he could. Other nights, Mason sat closer, elbows brushing when he reached for popcorn or grabbed the remote. Jamie's heart always jumped first. His brain tried to catch up later. One night, Mason lay flat on the floor, a slice of pizza resting on his chest as he stared at the ceiling. You ever think about disappearing? He asked suddenly. Jamie blinked. What? Not like running away, Mason clarified. Just starting over somewhere new, being someone different. Jamie thought about Manchester, how new it felt, how foreign he still felt inside it. Yeah, he said quietly. Maybe that's what I'm doing. Mason hummed. Makes two of us, then. Jamie had never expected a man like Mason, bright, loud, golden, to carry shadows. But he heard loneliness in that sound, soft and unguarded. It made something tighten in his chest. Little moments piled up. Mason showing Jamie a funny video on his phone, leaning in so close their shoulders pressed together. Mason stretching after a workout, groaning lightly as his back arched, shirt riding up. Mason falling asleep on the sofa once, head tilted toward Jamie, breath slow and steady. Jamie found himself watching these things too often, too long. He tried to hide it, but hiding only made the ache worse. Then came the late-night conversation that shifted everything. It was well past midnight. They'd finished a film neither of them cared about and sat at the kitchen table with glasses of water instead of the beers they'd joked about drinking. The flat was unusually quiet. The city noises through the window felt distant, muted. Mason sat with his hair tousled from lying on the sofa, hoodie half-zipped, eyes tired but open in a way Jamie wasn't used to. "You ever feel," Mason began, staring at the counter, "like everyone else has a head start?" Jamie nodded slowly. "Most days." Mason's jaw tightened. "People think I'm sordid because I'm loud, but it's just easier to be loud than to say you don't know what you're doing." Jamie understood that more deeply than he wanted to admit. He hadn't expected Mason to share something so raw. "Loneliness hits weird at night," Mason added quietly. Jamie exhaled. "Yeah, it does." Mason finally looked up. For a heartbeat, the air felt too still, too fragile. Their eyes held a moment longer than they should have. Then Mason smirked softly, trying to lighten the tension. "Guess that makes us two blokes with tragic sleep schedules, eh?" Jamie laughed, but the softness stayed. They talked for another hour. Silly stories, stupid jokes, memories that didn't hurt too much. But the undercurrent of honesty lingered beneath every sentence. When Mason got up to head to bed, he clapped Jamie's shoulder gently. "Don't overthink everything. Life's like training, reps and rest. You'll get stronger." Jamie blinked. "Is that your emotional wisdom disguised as gym chat?" "Everything's gym chat if you try hard enough," Mason said, laughing as he walked toward his room. The next morning, things felt different. Not dramatic or strange, just realer, as if that conversation had unlocked something between them they weren't allowed to ignore anymore. Mason cooked oatmeal, stirring the pot with the concentration of someone pretending not to think too hard. He spoke without turning around. "So, my trainer needs updated measurements this month." Jamie froze mid-sip of coffee. "Need to track progress properly," Mason continued casually. "You know, shoulders, chest, arms. Nothing fancy." Jamie felt the tension rise in his chest. "And you're telling me because?" Mason turned, spoon in hand, smirk playful. "Because you seem good with details. Thought you could help." Jamie nearly spilled his drink. "I don't think. It's science," Mason said, winking. "Pure science." Jamie stared at him. Mason grinned wider. This wasn't flirting. Not exactly. But it wasn't nothing either. Jamie went to bed that night replaying Mason's smile. His tone. The way his eyes lingered when he'd made the joke. Something about it felt heavy and light at the same time. He wasn't sure what it meant. He wasn't sure he wanted to know. But he knew one thing with unshakable clarity. Mason came home later than usual that evening, and Jamie felt it before he even heard the keys. Something in the flat shifted, the kind of energy that enters a room a second before a person does. Jamie was half lying on the sofa, a documentary playing quietly, more background noise than entertainment. His thoughts had been looping all day around Mason's joke about needing measurements. A throwaway comment, harmless on the surface. Yet it clung to him like static. The front door clicked open. Mason stepped inside, gym bag slung over his shoulder, hoodie damp around the collar from sweat. He kicked the door shut with his foot, dropped the bag by the counter, and peeled the hoodie off in one smooth motion. His t-shirt beneath was soaked from a heavy workout, clinging to the lines of his chest. "Smells like takeaway and existential dread," he called out, tone teasing as he wiped his forehead with a towel. Jamie muted the TV. "You good?" "Always," Mason said, grabbing a bottle of water from the fridge and taking a long drink. Then he smiled, a slow, mischievous smile that Jamie recognized too well. "That reminds me. Got something for you." Jamie sat up, dread and curiosity tangling together. "For me?" Mason unzipped the side pocket of his gym bag with dramatic flair and pulled out a small, retractable tape measure. He dangled it between his fingers like a magician revealing a card. "Told you I needed progress checks." His grin widened. "Thought you could help." Jamie stared at the tape measure. Something twisted in his stomach. Anticipation, nerves, something warmer he refused to name. "You're serious?" "Very." Mason tossed the tape onto the coffee table. It landed with a soft thud that felt louder in Jamie's chest. "Come on. Nothing weird. Just numbers. Just numbers." Jamie wished it were that simple. Mason tugged his gym shirt over his head and threw it onto the back of a chair. His skin gleamed, warm and flushed, the rise and fall of his breath slow from exhaustion. He stood in front of Jamie with the kind of confidence that wasn't even performative, just natural. "Well?" he asked. "You game?" Jamie swallowed, trying to steady his voice. "If we're doing this, let's just get it over with." "That's the spirit," Mason said, stepping closer. "Strictly scientific." Jamie picked up the tape measure, hands already unsteady. "Shoulders first," Mason said, turning around. "Just go from end to end." Jamie stood behind him, the tape stretching between his fingers as he brought it across broad, muscular shoulders. Mason's skin was warm beneath the cold plastic. Jamie breathed in slowly, fighting the urge to step back. "What's the number?" Mason asked, voice softer than before. 21.5, Jamie managed. "Decent," Mason murmured, glancing back over his shoulder with a smile. Next was chest. Jamie hesitated. "Want me to hold it in place?" Mason asked, eyebrow raised. Jamie didn't answer fast enough. Mason stepped forward and gently placed his hand over Jamie's, guiding the tape across the center of his chest. His palm was warm. His fingers curled slightly over Jamie's knuckles. The touch was brief, but it lingered, lighting a spark under Jamie's skin. Jamie's breath hitched before he could hide it. Mason didn't comment, but something in his expression shifted. Just a flicker, a softening. 42.4, Jamie muttered, voice embarrassingly unsteady. Mason chuckled quietly. Progress. They moved on. Biceps, waist, upper arms. Each measurement required Jamie to step in close to adjust the tape to brush skin. Mason breathed evenly but watched Jamie the entire time, eyes curious, thoughtful, almost gentle. Jamie tried to keep it light. Mason kept trying to joke. But the jokes never landed quite the same. Something unspoken circled between them, patient and pulsing like a second heartbeat. As Jamie finished the last measurement, winding the tape slowly around his hand, Mason stood surprisingly still. He didn't grab a shirt, didn't make a joke, didn't move. He simply watched Jamie. Then, quietly, too quietly for Mason, he asked, "Does this make you uncomfortable?" Jamie froze. Mason's face held no teasing, no smirk, no arrogance. Just genuine curiosity. Just concern. Just honesty. Jamie forced himself to meet his eyes. "A little." Mason nodded once. "Why?" Jamie swallowed. The truth pressed against his teeth, dangerous and necessary. "Not for the reason you think." The words left him before he could soften them. They hung in the air, heavy, real, undeniable. Mason's expression flickered. Surprise, then understanding, then something deeper. His shoulders relaxed, his jaw unclenched. He didn't move closer, but he didn't step back either. "Okay," he said softly. "Thanks for telling me." Jamie nodded, heart racing. Silence settled, but it wasn't awkward. It was something else. Something like the moment before a match begins. Breath held, waiting for the bell. Mason finally bent down to grab his shirt but didn't put it on. "Didn't want to push anything," he said quietly. "I mess around too much. I know that. But I'd never want to make you feel weird." "You didn't," Jamie said quickly. "It's just, it felt close. Closer than I expected." Mason looked at him with an expression Jamie had never seen before. Shy, almost. Vulnerable in a way that didn't match his usual confidence. "Yeah," Mason said. "Same." Jamie sat down on the sofa. Mason lingered at the table, then slowly crossed the room and sat beside him. Not touching, not too close, but close enough. You know, Mason said softly, rubbing the back of his neck. I joke a lot because it's easier. Easier than saying the wrong thing. Or saying the right thing at the wrong time. Jamie nodded. He understood that too well. I wasn't expecting any of this to feel real. Mason didn't speak for a moment. Then, low and careful, he said, Feels real to me. Jamie's heart stumbled. Neither moved. Not a centimeter. But the space between them changed, shifted, warmed, opened. Jamie looked down at the tape measure curled on the table, its metal edge glinting under the lamp. A small, stupid object. A harmless joke. And somehow, the beginning of something neither of them had planned for. Eventually Mason stood. I'm gonna shower, he said, voice softer than usual. If you need anything, just shout. Jamie nodded. Yeah. Mason walked down the hall. Stopped. Turned slightly, hand on his bedroom doorframe. Jamie? Yeah. I wasn't teasing you. Not today. Not about this. Jamie felt his breath catch. I know. Mason nodded once. Slow, meaningful, before disappearing into his room. The door closed quietly. Jamie sat in the dim living room, the tape measure lying on the table like a secret they had both finally touched. Something had shifted. Not loudly, not dramatically, but undeniably. And whatever came next would not be the same as what came before. The days after the measurement scene didn't explode into drama the way Jamie feared. There was no big argument, no awkward avoidance, no strange conversation forced between them. Instead, the tension settled into the flat like a second atmosphere. Thin, invisible but impossible to ignore. They talked. They laughed. They functioned. Everything looked normal from the outside. But underneath every word was something unspoken. Jamie woke early the next morning to find Mason already in the kitchen, stirring oats in a pot, wearing one of his oversized hoodies. His hair was messy, his movements slower than usual, as if he hadn't slept well. Jamie hesitated at the doorway. Mason looked up, eyes flicking to Jamie's face, then quickly back to the pot. Morning, he said, voice too even. Morning, Jamie replied, trying to sound normal. Mason slid a bowl toward him. Made extra. Jamie took it silently. They ate in a strangely synchronized rhythm. Same spoon pace, same quiet chewing, same glances they tried to hide. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it wasn't effortless either. It felt like both of them were scared to breathe too loudly. Over the next few days, their routines shifted in small, subtle ways. Mason didn't wander around shirtless as often. He wore hoodies or t-shirts more, almost absent-mindedly. Jamie couldn't tell if it was intentional or if Mason was simply adjusting to the new awareness between them. Mason's jokes remained, but lighter, gentler, as if he didn't want to cross something delicate. Sometimes Jamie missed the careless boldness, the swagger. But another part of him liked this softer version more. One evening, Jamie was on the sofa scrolling through his phone when Mason came in and sat down beside him. Not too close, but closer than a stranger would. Mason didn't say anything at first. He just stared at the switched-off TV. You're quiet lately, Mason said eventually. Jamie paused. You've been quieter too. Mason huffed a small laugh. Yeah, I didn't want to push anything. There it was again. That word. Push. Jamie's pulse quickened. Push what? Mason shrugged, eyes still on the TV. I don't know. A line. A boundary. Something you're not ready for. Jamie swallowed hard. What makes you think I'm not ready? Mason finally looked at him. Really looked. Eyes warm, cautious, curious. Because you look away every time it gets too close, Mason said quietly. And I don't want to freak you out. Jamie's breath caught painfully in his chest. He didn't look away this time. I wasn't freaked out, he said slowly. Just surprised. Mason studied him for a moment, then nodded. Fair. Silence settled again, different this time. Less heavy. More honest. A few days passed like this. Cautious normality, gentle distance, Small moments that tightened something inside Jamie's chest. One evening, Jamie was cooking pasta while Mason leaned against the counter, arms folded. The kitchen filled with the smell of garlic and simmering tomatoes. The window was open to the warm Manchester night, the distant noise of the city drifting in. Mason watched Jamie with a quiet focus he didn't bother hiding. "You thinking about something?" Jamie asked without turning around. "A few things," Mason said. "You?" "Same." Mason stepped closer. Not close enough to touch, but close enough that Jamie felt the warmth of him. "You know," Mason said softly, "I didn't expect any of this to feel different." Jamie stirred the pot slowly. "Different how?" Mason hesitated, the first real hesitation Jamie had ever seen from him. "Closer. Realer. Whatever word you want." Jamie put the spoon down, his heart strangely loud. "You're not the only one," he said. Mason exhaled, relief maybe, or fear. Later that night, they ended up in the living room again, sitting on opposite ends of the sofa at first. But gradually, like gravity, they drew closer until only a small space remained between them. Neither acknowledged it. The film playing was completely ignored. At one point, Mason shifted, his knee brushing Jamie's. Jamie didn't move away. Neither did Mason. "Jamie," Mason said quietly. Jamie turned his head. "We can talk about it," Mason murmured. "About what?" "You know." Jamie swallowed. "You go first." Mason let out a breath that trembled just slightly. "I don't want to ruin anything. Not this. Not us living together. Not this, whatever this is." Jamie felt something twist painfully inside. He reached for words, fumbling. "You haven't ruined anything." Mason looked down at his hands. "I've never been good at this. Feelings. Saying them. I usually cover it up with jokes or flirting or being loud. But with you—" He stopped, shaking his head. "It doesn't feel like a joke." Jamie's heart thudded. Silence stretched, waiting for someone to break it. Jamie did. "I wasn't uncomfortable that night because of what we were doing," he said softly. "I was uncomfortable because of how it made me feel." Mason's head lifted slightly. "And how was that?" Jamie's throat tightened. "Close. Too close. In a way I wasn't prepared for." A long pause. Then Mason whispered, "Same." Jamie breathed out shakily. "I've been confused for weeks, trying to figure out what any of this means." Mason nodded slowly. "Me too." Another quiet moment. Then Mason shifted slightly, leaning not forward but sideways, reducing the space between them by barely an inch, but it felt like a step across a line neither had named. "You know," Mason said carefully, "you don't have to have everything figured out. Not now. Not ever. I needed you to know I wasn't messing with you." Jamie blinked. "You weren't." Mason gave a small, nervous laugh. "No. I was trying to read you, and failing pretty badly." Jamie smiled faintly. "I thought you were just being you." "Oh, I was," Mason said. "But also, and not just that." Jamie's chest felt warm, too warm, almost painful. He stared at their hands resting near each other on the sofa cushion. Close, almost touching. One small movement away. "Mason," Jamie said quietly. "I don't know what this is." Mason nodded. "I don't need you to know. I just need to know you're not scared of it." Jamie inhaled softly. "I'm not scared." Mason's breath shivered just once, as if those words meant more than they should have. Slowly, so slowly, it barely counted as movement, Mason let his fingers brush against Jamie's. Not grabbing, not taking, just a gentle graze. A question without words. Jamie exhaled and let his pinky nudge back, tiny but unmistakable. Mason's shoulders relaxed. They didn't look at each other. They didn't speak. They just let their hands rest near each other, skin touching in the smallest, quietest way possible. It wasn't a confession in words. It didn't need to be. The confession was in the silence that finally stopped being heavy and became something warm, something careful, something shared, something new. Jamie woke the next morning expecting everything to feel awkward again. A touch, no matter how small, usually changed things. Made them heavy. Made them complicated. Made people pull away. But when he stepped into the kitchen, Mason was already there, barefoot, hair sticking up on one side, wearing a hoodie 3 sizes too big. He was humming off-key as he poured oats into a saucepan. When he looked up, there was no stiffness, no hesitation, no flicker of panic. Just a small, warm smile. "Morning," Mason said, voice still rough from sleep. "Morning," Jamie replied. And that was it. No awkwardness. No pulling back. A new normal arrived like sunlight sliding across a floor. Quiet, effortless, gentle. Mason pushed a mug of coffee toward Jamie. The green one with the chipped handle, Mason's favorite. The one Jamie always used now without asking. "2 sugars, yeah?" Mason said. "Yeah." They ate breakfast together, ankles brushing under the table once, twice, neither of them moving away. The silence didn't feel like absence anymore. It felt full, like a conversation waiting to happen instead of one trying to hide. Over the next few days, their rhythm formed naturally, without big discussions, without labels, without plans spoken out loud. Some mornings they ran together through the neighborhood, headphones in, matching each other's pace without talking. Mason would glance at Jamie every few minutes, checking he wasn't dying. Jamie would roll his eyes, pretending he didn't enjoy being looked after. Other mornings they stayed in, cooking breakfast side by side. Mason moved around the kitchen with a kind of easy confidence. But now he stepped aside so Jamie could reach things. Now he bumped Jamie's shoulder with intention, not accident. Now he watched Jamie as he stirred tea or chopped vegetables, eyes softer, quieter than before. One afternoon, Jamie found Mason standing in front of the long mirror in the corridor, shirtless, frowning slightly at his reflection. He was holding the tape measure they'd used that night, the one that started everything, twisting it between his fingers. "Progress check," Jamie asked lightly, stepping closer. Mason looked over his shoulder. "Thought I'd peek." "You missed it." Jamie crossed his arms. "Oh no, what a tragedy." Mason threw a rolled-up towel at him, laughing. The laughter felt different now. Less about breaking tension, more about sharing something simple and warm. Later that night, they sat on the sofa watching a documentary neither cared about. They shared the blanket thrown over the back of the couch without discussing it, Jamie's knee resting lightly against Mason's. At some point Mason leaned back, and his head angled slightly toward Jamie's shoulder, close enough for Jamie to feel the warmth of his breath. Neither of them moved away. These moments, tiny, ordinary, soft, were somehow more intimate than any dramatic confession. They were becoming something before either dared to name it. One sunny Sunday morning, Jamie woke to light spilling through his curtains. He walked into the kitchen and stopped in the doorway, watching Mason pour coffee into 2 mugs. The sunlight caught Mason's jawline, highlighting the gentle slope of his smile. Jamie didn't speak. He just watched, unaware that something in his expression must have changed. Mason looked up and blinked slowly, a small smile pulling the corner of his mouth. "You're different in the mornings, you know?" Jamie stepped forward. "How?" "Just softer," Mason said. "Calmer. Like I'm seeing the real you." Jamie let out a quiet breath, stepping closer until their arms nearly touched at the counter. "Maybe it's just you seeing me clearly." Mason's smile deepened. He lifted one hand off his mug and rested it lightly on the table beside Jamie's. "Close. Intentional." Jamie reached out and placed his fingers gently over Mason's. Not grabbing, not holding, just resting. The way Mason had done on the couch that night. Mason looked at their hands, then up at Jamie, a slow warmth blooming behind his eyes. "I like the view," he murmured. Jamie felt something settle in his chest, a warmth that was steady instead of frightening. They stood like that for a while, fingers lightly touching, the morning sun painting the room gold. There was no rush, no pressure, no need to move or label or define. Lunch came with easy chatter, Mason dancing terribly to a playlist Jamie made. Jamie laughed in a way he didn't recognize at first. It had been a long time since he'd laughed without the weight of self-consciousness. In the evening, Mason perched on the kitchen counter while Jamie stirred pasta sauce, swinging his legs and talking about his day. He told Jamie about a difficult client at the studio, about a joke he'd made that fell flat, about a moment he'd been proud of. "You listen differently," Mason said suddenly. Jamie glanced up. "Differently how?" Mason shrugged. "Like it matters what I'm saying." "It does," Jamie said simply. The words hung there. Not heavy, not scary, just honest. Mason hopped down from the counter, stepped behind Jamie, and reached forward to help stir the sauce. He didn't need to. It wasn't practical. But he stood close enough that Jamie could feel the warmth of him along his back. Mason's breath brushed Jamie's shoulder as he spoke again. "I like this," Mason said quietly. Jamie felt the words all the way to his spine. "Me too." After dinner, they watched a film on the sofa again. But this time Mason didn't wait for an accident to happen. He let his arm rest along the back of the cushions, and Jamie leaned just slightly into him. Not quite a cuddle, not quite not. Halfway through the film, Mason shifted his hand down, letting it rest near Jamie's shoulder. Jamie exhaled and let his head tilt just enough for it to count. No one kissed. No one rushed. It wasn't that kind of beginning. It was the kind that built slowly, quietly, carefully. The kind that didn't break anything in its arrival but instead fitted itself gently into the spaces that had been waiting for it. Later that night, as they got ready for bed, Mason paused at his doorframe and looked at Jamie standing in the hallway. "Hey," Mason said softly. Jamie looked up. "Yeah, thanks for not running away." Jamie gave a small, real smile. "I wasn't planning to." Mason nodded, eyes warm. "Good, 'cause I'm glad you're here." Jamie's breath caught. Not painfully this time, but like something soft settling into place. He stepped a little closer. Not touching, but close enough. "I'm glad I'm here too," Jamie said. They both stood there in the dim hallway, feeling the quiet hum of something new, steady, warm, unhurried. Something that didn't need a name yet. And when they finally walked to their separate rooms, the silence wasn't empty. It was a promise, a beginning, the kind that didn't need thunder or declarations. Just two people slowly, gently, honestly finding their way into each other's lives. A little closer every day.